Sir Francis Galton was not available to be interviewed, seeing as how he passed in 1911. He's a complicated historical figure given some of his views on eugenics, but his contributions to statistics are hard to ignore. He is often credited, probably rightly so, as really introducing the use of questionnaires and surveys for collecting data on people and populations. That sounds like such an incredibly obvious thing to do by today's standards, but it had to start at some point. Most of you will know him from the famous story about guessing the cow's weight. These results are published in his 1907 Nature article about an experiment conducted the year before at what I believe was a state fair. There was some sort of raise the fattest calf award, I guess, going on. Now, the judges who gave the award used a proper scale. But in parallel to that, Galton ran a little experiment. He got nearly 800 people to guess the weight, which they didn't know in advance, guess the weight of the cow. And I have to assume that people at the turn of the previous century were much more aware of the weights of cows and other livestock. I have no idea what to guess. Although maybe that's okay, because the point of this story is that when Galton took the mean average of all the guesses, he got within 1%, a little under 1% away from the true answer. You can try this for yourself. It's repeatable. Guess how many jelly beans are in the jar. Guess how many plastic balls are in the play pit. Ask a large enough sample size, and for many questions, there is a sort of a wisdom of the crowds. That average will come pretty close to the true value, like a nice way of blending all the knowledge of the crowd. Surveys are an undeniably valuable tool. For example, I recently read 4 out of 5 data scientists agree Data Skeptic is the best podcast. And that 5th data scientist is going to get a knuckle sandwich as soon as I can track him down. Actually, that's not true at all. The 1 out of 5 is the person I want to talk to the most, because that's where I can learn how to improve the show. So if you wouldn't mind, head over to survey.dataskeptic.com. That's singular. S at the beginning, not at the end. Survey.dataskeptic.com. That will drop you into our little onboarding survey where I'm trying to get some general knowledge about the listening audience. And after you complete the onboarding survey, we've got a little dashboard of 8 or 9 other choices of topics you can pick if you're interested in sharing your views. I'll be sharing the results of those polls on the show in the coming weeks. In fact, we're going to do that for the whole season, because this new season of Data Skeptic is all about surveys. I was thinking about calling the season Selection Bias. It's probably the best technical name, primarily because whenever you consider a survey, you intrinsically have to ask about selection bias. Even if the person who conducted the survey did a rigorous, robust way of stratifying their sample across all the demographic groups and populations and everything else, no matter how hard you try, the people that respond to your survey will always have at least one bias. That is, it's 100% composed of people willing to take surveys. And while I like selection bias, it's not exactly what we're going to focus on. For a long time, the working title of this season was going to be Vox Populi. But ultimately, I decided that's a little too pretentious. So we're going to keep it simple. This season is Data Skeptic Surveys. For the next few months, we're going to explore this process from multiple angles. How do you conduct a good survey? How do you get people to answer it? If you incentivize people to answer it, how do you deal with fraud? Do you really think anyone's still awake after your 45-minute survey? And what are surveys good for versus not good for? Like I said, there's a wisdom of the crowds, but sometimes the crowd is a mob. So to help kick this season off, I asked Linhda to come back on and share some of her thoughts to help guide me on the direction I want to take this topic. We'll catch up with her right after a quick break. Thanks for coming back on the show, Linhda.
Thank you.
I asked you back because we're starting our new season and I wanted to get some input from you. So the topic of the new season is all about surveys and survey design and stuff like that. So let me kick this off with some softballs. Do you or do you not participate in surveys when you get them?
Sometimes, depends if I care.
What's the motivating factor there? Dig into that.
One example is 23andMe. They always want me to survey me, but then they sell my data for free. So I refuse to answer surveys.
Well, they sell it to their profit is what you mean.
Yeah, but they don't pay me. And so in the past, I had spent time filling out the surveys, which are pretty in-depth. They'll be like, has anyone has diabetes? If so, which person? Do you know what parent it is? Blah, blah. They just ask very, very detailed questions. And I would fill them out. But and then on top of that, they wouldn't give me any feedback. They wouldn't say, great, we used your data for X. I would just see a news headline that was like 23andMe strikes a deal offering data to X company. I'm like, what?
Well, how much do you think you should have been compensated? What's the right number?
I don't really go into that just because I don't know how much they're selling it for and how much data they have. But I mean, I think I should get like $5, $10, $20. Depends how much profit they make, really.
Okay, so that's the incentive to participate. Since they're not going to give you any feedback, they should at least pay you $5, $10, or $20, right?
Uh,
Those are
I
very
mean, it's
expensive
just
in
more.
cents, let me tell you.
What'd you say?
By industry standards that I know, those are pretty expensive in cents. 5 is common, but five's on the high side.
Yeah, I know. So that's why I just stopped taking the
All right.
surveys.
What about for something that you do care about? Like if there was some sort of parrot owner survey, I'm sure you'd take that.
Yeah, I probably would because the parrot owners are a small community. And so I want them to have the best and accurate data on parrots and parrot care.
Have you ever conducted a survey?
Yeah, being on our block club, sometimes we survey the participating members. Like one example is we said, oh, what are some concerns of people on our block club? Number one was obviously crime and safety. And then we were like, oh, would you be interested? What kind of events would you be interested in? And they were interested in social events to get to know your neighbors.
When you asked them this, was it open-ended or did you give them check boxes?
It was a mix of both.
Okay. Who designed the survey?
I think I did. I just used Google Survey. I didn't spend too much time on it. I just drew it up really quickly and put it out there.
Well, have you ever taken a survey where you think the survey author did not spend enough time designing the questions?
Oh yeah, sometimes they'll say you they're like you have to answer one of these answers and I'll be like, "Well, I'm not any of them." And they don't even have an answer that says does not apply to me.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of challenges around that. With these, your experience taking and I guess issuing a few surveys, what do you think of surveys as a useful measurement tool?
As a useful measurement of what?
Of getting information. Like, do you think that the data you got on the block club accurately reflects the sentiments of the local community?
Probably, I think so. We also had open-ended. We were like, "Oh, are there any others that we didn't name?" We had a lot of things you could check. Then we said anything else you wanted to share, so that at least people can fill out the open ended ones. Definitely. And I think it mirrored what people talked about during the meetings. I mean, crime was a big one.
Yeah, it's kind of a softball in neighborhood concerns. That's
Yeah.
number one usually. Well, what about if you had a lot more responses? Like you sent something out on behalf of your employer and it went out to millions of people. You can't read all those open ended questions. What do you think about a survey of that scale?
I mean, I actually think you should still have some sort of open ended because I suspect most surveys have a hole where they're missing something. But, it doesn't have to be like every question has an open ended. Maybe it's just at the end. Anything else you'd like to share? And whether you get to reading that or not is up to you. But I oftentimes take surveys and I'm like, this is really dumb. And I would like to give feedback on how dumb it is.
Yeah, and hopefully the person reads it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they'll read it, but I just want them to give them feedback that I did not think it was a good survey. So some surveys, like I start, like I said, and they don't have the answers that are applicable to me, and I'll be stuck because it won't let me move forward. They'll be like, you have to select one answer. And I'm like, none of these are applicable. So I'm like, should I take the survey or just exit out? So I'll just be like exiting. So sometimes I start surveys a lot. And I'll be like, what in the world? This is not they didn't think of the answers. They didn't think of like if yes, if no, here's what you're supposed to do. Nope.
Yeah, surveys often report their completion rate, and it's almost never 100%. But a good survey should be 90-95%, I think. But those rates go down typically as the length of the survey becomes absurd. Like there are people that launch 45-minute surveys. I can't fathom you're really getting that much insight from something that takes that long. But those will have big declines in completion rates.
Yeah, that's another thing that annoys me about surveys is first of all, on the page, they don't have any indicator of how long it's going to go.
Mm.
So after you answer like a few questions, I start to get very frustrated because at the same time I'll be like, I want to finish this so that my answers are recorded, but there's no indicator showing me how many are left.
Thanks to our sponsor, Neptune.ai. 99% of machine learning teams are doing awesome things at a reasonable scale with 4 people and 2 production models. But most of the industry best practices come from a handful of companies operating models at hyperscale. The folks over at Neptune.ai want to change that by sharing insights, tool stacks, and real life stories from practitioners doing machine learning and ML ops at a reasonable scale. They even built a flexible tool for experiment tracking and model registry that will fit with your workflow at no scale, reasonable scale, and beyond. Check them out at Neptune.ai. So this season, I'm planning out all the interviews now. Do you think it would be more interesting if I talked to the people that create surveys or the people that take the surveys?
What's your question? Do you think it's more interesting to have a topic
A
about what?
guest, yeah. If you were going to tune into Data Skeptic, would you rather hear from someone who does survey research or someone who takes the surveys and their perspective?
Probably does the research.
Okay, good, because that's mostly what I'm going to cover.
Good.
But I am trying to get in touch with people who take surveys and I guess survey them via podcast.
Yeah.
Are there any topics you think I should get into, like surveys about politics or the economy or what people think about the price of gas?
I mean, it kind of depends. Who is your audience? And I think you said earlier you're expecting like 100 replies. So you're expecting 100 replies?
At a minimum, I expect, yeah.
I don't really know. It depends. What are you going to do with the results of the survey? You're going to sell them, or are you just going to be like, whatever?
There's nothing you could sell here. Like what? 9 out of 10 Data Skeptic listeners prefer Coke. I don't know. Like,
That's exactly my question. What is the purpose of doing this?
it'll be content for the show. We get to share little tidbits about the audience, insights about who you guys are demographically, and some of your preferences, and sort of a neat way to get insight. Like, I have questions about the adoption of electric cars, and I'd like to know what my audience thinks as well. I don't want to guess. I want to measure them.
So when you do that, are you also looking at the general population? Are you looking at other surveys and seeing what they've found?
Well, that's a good point. So, initially, no, I'm going to do just some like general surveys, but at some point, I could copy somebody else's survey and give it to my audience, and then compare to the other results as ground truth. That could be interesting, but it's a little bit hard to find people that share those that are of some renown. You know, like I could find somebody who shared their questions and answers. But the big companies tend to have those copyrighted, and I don't know of anybody like medium companies that I would copy their survey, but I should look for that.
I mean, if your goal is just to get some insights and it's fun fodder, then it's whatever you want to talk about. I mean, now the question is a content question. And content, what is good content? I'm just at a question mark as
All
well.
right.
So
Well, tell me, which of these two things do you think it would be more interesting? A show about the results of some survey or about the process of survey design?
I mean, I think survey design could be interesting, but you really have to dive into it and actually talk about topics that are useful. Like saying like, "Oh, in an A/B question, give an A/B answer." That's not
Yeah,
really
yeah.
interesting. So you have to talk about common pitfalls. It's like, "Oh, I've seen this common thing. This is how it's set it up. In this
Mm-hmm.
research, they actually set it up this way, and I'm criticizing them for that because XYZ." You know, actual world real world implications. And actually, I would actually recommend criticizing existing surveys too, so that people actually see how you're questioning the data.
All right, one last more interesting question. Do you think it would be more interesting to talk about fraud detection amongst people who are taking surveys just to get paid, or about political decisions that are made based on surveys?
If you're going to talk about political decisions, what specifically about them?
Well, the big one is the census, right? A lot of things are like attached to the census, and the census is a form of a survey.
I mean, I think, if you're going to tie it to the census, then that'd be great. If you're going to criticize the census, I'd love to hear what criticisms there are.
Why do I have to criticize everything? Why can't I just report on it?
Well, you're the data skeptic, so I thought you'd be
Well,
skeptic.
I'm skeptical of and with data. You know, sometimes it's the story of the methods that bring us to truth.
Right. So if I thought you'd be critical of the method, I would be surprised if you looked at the census and said they are doing a great job.
What? Well, I mean, say more. Why do you say that?
Well, it's like there's questions about what kind of ethnicities to include. That's an example that's political.
Hmm.
Should we include Asians and which Asians? And should we call them this name and whatnot? Will that influence the way people respond to ethnicity? Are you trying to skew it that there's more people of this group versus the other?
Oh, actually, now that you brought it up, that's probably the best criticism I know of the census. That there are certain groups, Japanese Americans in particular, who don't like the census. They don't trust it and don't want to respond because the census was used during the Japanese internment camps during the war. So we have at least one demographic that is probably not being as well measured as others.
Hmm.
But I mean, at the
Hmm.
same time, the census is important because that's how they decide to allocate funds for your community. So you got to be counted.
Yeah.
Well, complex stuff. We
I'm
got a whole season
confused.
to get into it for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're going to delve into the census, I would say be critical of it.
What would it take to get you to participate in some surveys?
You have a strong purpose, you have a clear definition of what you want as a result of the survey. I have to feel like I'm making a contribution, and your
Uh-huh.
survey has to be clean, easy to take, and short.
That is a good list. I'm going to work on that and get back to you.
All right.
Oh, you didn't mention incentive. Do you have to be incentivized, or would me sharing the results of the survey be incentive enough?
I mean, I think sharing the results would be great. Like
I
I
think
said, if
so
you have
too.
some altruistic motivation that you shared, that would be a motivation. If you don't, then yeah, pay me.
Yeah, so here's my angle with the surveys we're going to do for this season that I'm going to run at survey.dataskeptic.com. They're going to be meet a lot of your criteria, and we're going to make them meet all. Right now, they're short and they're relatively easy and simple. And some of them are just for fun, but some of them are novel things. Like I have one I'm working on now that's all about retirement and people's plans for retirement. And the reason I want to participate is because I want to know how I compare to others in the age group. You know, what are people more or less prepared than I am for retirement? Or I should say, we are than retirement.
Well, I mean, that one's a good one. I'm curious, but don't you think people are going to underreport how much money they have?
Oh, that'll be an interesting dilemma.
That's a common problem. Earnings, I think with earnings, people commonly underreport. So, I mean, the retirement will be the same. People will be like, oh, I'm not going to report all my
Well, I'm not
assets.
the government, I'm just a survey guy.
Well, why should they trust you?
Although I guess if they think it's getting subpoenaed or something, yeah.
Why should they trust you? We don't know.
You filled out a survey that said you make more money than you reported.
No, you usually underreport.
To the government, but I feel like on a survey, people would braggadociously overreport.
I don't know.
Like, I remember a friend of mine telling me how he was making six figures. And then later he broke it down where, like, you had to count a certain way and look sideways to get to the sixth figure, but he got it, and that was important.
So, did he answer survey questions that
I'm
way?
sure he did. I'm sure he put 100,000 plus as his income, even though it was really like 95.
Well, I mean, 95, that's a 5K difference. That's
Well, he
fine.
checked the wrong box if he took a survey, I think.
Well, I mean, that's within the margin of error when you're going to talk about earnings. Like again, that speaks to again with earnings, how do you actually calculate your retirement amount? I don't think it's hard to say.
Here's a bigger problem. On our onboarding survey, I asked people to give their household income in US dollars. That's the majority of our audience, but I don't know if other people are going to convert it. Maybe I should add something like prefer not to answer or not earning in US dollars or something. Make some last minute changes here.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how they're going to react.
I got a lot to figure out, but we'll take the initial results and then we'll keep sampling. Every week we'll report the longitudinal changes. I'm going to create a survey that's asking people stuff like if the show is going well or if I should be ousted as the host. And then we can kind of report over time if that goes up or down.
Well, maybe you should say more satisfaction on a level of 0 to 10. How satisfied are you with your host?
Yeah,
Because if you're going to say ousted, that's a clear binary. So people are usually going to say no.
unless they dislike
They
me.
would just stop listening.
But yeah, I guess they probably just stop listening. They
They're
wouldn't
already not
rage listen.
listening, the people who say no.
But then I can report 0% of listeners wanted me to leave as the host. That'll be a great headline.
But don't you want a learning?
Yes, you're right. I do want a learning. So yeah, we'll start with the 0 to 10. Maybe we'll come up with a net promoter score at some point. I'm not sure what I think about net promoter scores yet.
Yeah, I mean, that might be good to be like, oh, what did you think of last week's show X? If they watch the show. And then if you had that on every week, you could always report and be like, you guys did not like that show.
Yes, now that's a good idea.
That way you can see it going up and down. Yeah.
Yeah, this be the first way I can really get genuine feedback from the audience at a large scale.
And maybe that's a way to promote the survey, just being like, hey, I have a survey. And you have a section that's like just on if you like the show, what you didn't like, suggestions on content, and then you dive into the other part. Because I mean, people who are watching your show, they're probably more motivated to give feedback on the show and just random
Yes.
questions.
Yeah, mostly listening. You can watch it on YouTube, but it's just a still image of the logo. It's rather boring. I need to work on that.
Yeah, you could just say, "Hey, log in, send me feedback on if you like this show. I have an ongoing survey that's been running for X months, so I will also report on how others thought. Trending up,
Perfect.
trending down, etc."
Yeah, maybe I'll have you back at the end of the season. I'll let you know how we trended.
You might even have funny quotes of people being like, "Did not like this," that you could
Oh, I
share.
do have one survey that's fun. It's just called the Silly Survey. I ask people, like, what's the best name for a pet raven, or a pet crow, I mean. And there's a list of names, stuff
Oh
like that.
yeah, you told me about that.
That was
Yeah.
a good one.
Did people answer yet?
No, this hasn't aired yet. But
Okay.
people, as they're, someone could be answering that right now as they're listening. You know how spooky that feels for us to be talking about them as they do it?
Oh no, that's exciting. Well, I can't wait to see what other ideas people have.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Linda.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
In my opinion, at the root of data science is metrology. That's the study of measurement. I used to have it in my bio that it was one of my interests, but I took it out because anyone who would read that would always mispronounce it as meteorology. And metrology is my interest, not meteorology. So our topic for this season's surveys, well, surveys, to my mind, are a measuring tool. There are public opinion polls, the census, obviously, upon which many decisions are made by the government. There are big companies like Nielsen that have been around for a long time measuring things, or Gallup and Pew. Clearly, all this isn't for nothing. Surveys are a valuable measurement tool, but they're not like a piece of scientific equipment. If you buy some scientific equipment and you operate it according to the manufacturer's specifications, you should get pretty reliable measurements. Or the degree that they have variance is probably explained to you by the manufacturer, how that variance comes to be. Surveys, on the other hand, are a much softer science. And in part, I believe this is because statistics kind of fail us at times. Well, the statistics don't, but our assumptions do. Just like in physics, you start by assuming you have a spherical cow. In statistics, you often start by assuming you have a certain distribution. And if the distribution is over something like a yes-no question, will this person purchase a product, yes or no? Or will this person click a link, yes or no? It's awfully tempting to use a binomial distribution. And at a high level, that's correct. A yes-no question is very much like a coin toss. Or I guess I should say a weighted coin, because we don't want to imply there's a 50-50 assumption. What's the probability someone will click on this ad? Almost certainly under 10%, depending on the platform and the content. There can be a decimal place and a lot of zeros in click-through rates as well. But let's say my site has a 1% click-through rate for whatever that's worth. We take the idea of a weighted coin toss, and then we can predict something like, out of the next 100 impressions, how many clicks should I get? Or what's the probability I'll get between 7 and 20 clicks? And that's all well and good if every internet browser, if every customer, if every data point you're counting is truly fungible. But the participants of a survey are people. They're hardly fungible. The path they took to arrive at your website and their decision-making process for if they will or will not click on some link on your site, well, that's a lifetime of experiences that led up to that one decision. And while, what happened to them as a child may not affect the choice, even the same person in a different mood at a different time on a different day is going to behave differently or answer differently. So when Sir Francis Galton took the mean of all the guesses of the cow's weight and got a little under 1% close to the true answer, I often worry that gives us a little bit more confidence in the wisdom of the crowd than should actually be there. Surveys should have one of two purposes, maybe both. In one case, for simple tabulation, we just need things counted. For example, the census. Obviously, many decisions, such as allocation of funds, are based on the census, but in and of itself, the goal is just to count. On the other hand, when organizations conduct surveys, the goal really ought to be to learn something. For example, you want to learn maybe how valuable a new feature would be, or you want to learn what the public opinion is of a new product you're thinking about launching. Launching a product often takes a lot of money. If you could find out in advance your product was going to fail, wouldn't you save that money? Or take the information and refine your product, assuming there was something to save? Movie theaters have been testing their work for quite a while, and politicians even do some forms of polling to see how their messages resonate with their constituents. It's clear that surveys are a useful tool, but how to use the tool correctly is where the problem comes in. Asking the right questions is a challenge we'll tackle in this season. I've got a few interviews lined up related to that. I'll also explore some of the techniques that people are using to try and improve the information they gather from surveys. For example, the concept of red herring questions. You should ask a few questions or maybe sneak in a few tricky answers just to test if your survey participant is paying attention and being honest. If you've ever tried to take paid surveys online, you've probably encountered a common problem. You attempt to take a survey, they ask you a bunch of demographic questions for which you give your time freely. A few pages later, a new question shows up like, do you or does anyone you know have mesothelioma? Yes or no? And when you click no, they say, sorry, we don't need you in this survey, thanks anyway, you don't get paid. Having that experience 2 or 3 times will generally make most people quit. But for some people, they see how to get into surveys. Do you have mesothelioma? I sure do. Do you own a yacht? I sure do. Are you in the market for a new car? I definitely am. When it's obvious what the survey is looking for, and the survey kicks you out when you don't have it, professional respondents learn how to craft their answers. There's a wide variety of different methodologies that are interesting in the survey domain. For example, tracker studies are meant to be longitudinally run, sampling the same group or maybe a variety of groups over time to see how the answers of something change. Do you think your country is going in the right direction or the wrong direction? That's a great tracker study. Well, I don't know about a great one, but a good example of a tracker study. So there's a lot to cover this season. Obviously, here on Data Skeptic, we most love research and methodology, and there's plenty of that to go around. There's lots to be skeptical of, from sampling bias to selection bias to fraud in survey taking. This topic is bigger than meets the eye. I definitely want to get into fraud detection like I was describing earlier, as well as the decision makers who need to look at survey data to act. And in closing, I'm going to ask you to do me one relatively quick favor. How could we do a season called Data Skeptic Surveys without actually doing some surveys? So please, give me a few minutes of your time. That's all this is going to take. Head over to survey.dataskeptic.com. That's a new site we just launched a week or so ago. It's fairly self-explanatory. I first and foremost want to ask you a few general questions so I know more about the listening audience. But after you fill out our onboarding survey, there's a dashboard of a bunch of other fun surveys to take. I would love to get your opinions. I'm going to be sharing the results of those in the future on the show here coming up. But once you take the survey, you get a chance to see how your answers compare to everyone else's. We share the results with you, and in fact, on your dashboard, we keep track of what surveys you've taken. So it's a pretty cool site. Please come and share your opinions at survey.dataskeptic.com. And last but not least, if you want to know more about the results, you want to see them early or know how we're building the site, for just this season, I'm going to do monthly live streams. Actually, we're calling them the focus group. Because, that's surveys do focus groups, sort of same kind of thing. So join the focus group. Head over to dataskeptic.com for information on when the next one is. It's a live stream. I'm going to be bringing guests on. It's a pretty casual, fun thing. But if you want to ask questions or join in, we're going to look to do some audience participation optional. More on the focus group will be showing up in our newsletter as well, so sign up for that. But if you're just going to do one thing for me, it's go to survey.dataskeptic.com and share your thoughts. Well, that's it for today. I'll be opening up the next episode with some of the results from this survey, so I look forward to sharing these insights with you all then. Until next time, this has been Data Skeptic Surveys.